Every culture has stories about places that should not be disturbed. Secret locations where knowledge too dangerous for mankind is stored away. I used to think these were just cautionary tales. Folklore meant to keep the curious from straying too far from home. I was wrong. Welcome to the Obscuralore Vault. I'm your host, and today I'll share with you a story that has fundamentally changed how I perceive our reality. What I found buried beneath an abandoned university building wasn't just forgotten texts. It was evidence that our universe is merely a thin membrane stretched over something far more horrifying than we could ever imagine. Before we begin, make sure you're somewhere safe and comfortable. What I'm about to share isn't for the faint of heart, and if you appreciate these dark journeys into the unknown, please consider subscribing to the Obscuralore Vault and hitting that notification bell. It helps keep these stories flowing. And trust me, there are many more terrors waiting to be revealed. Part 1. The Discovery. I've spent most of my adult life as an architectural preservationist, specializing in historical academic buildings. There's something about old libraries and lecture halls that has always called to me. Perhaps the accumulated weight of human knowledge pressing down on those aged foundations. 3 months ago, I received a contract to survey the abandoned west wing of Blackwood University's original campus. The buildings dated back to the 1880s and had been sealed off since a partial collapse in 1967. The university was considering restoration rather than demolition, which is where I came in. "We need to know if anything can be saved," the facilities director told me as she handed over a ring of ancient keys. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Keene, and something in her eyes made me uneasy, a certain guardedness when she spoke about the West Wing. Some of the lower levels may still be structurally sound, but be careful. No one set foot down there in decades. I remember asking her why they'd kept the wing sealed for so long instead of rebuilding. "Budget constraints," she said too quickly, and then people just forgot about it. The first few days were uneventful. I documented crumbling cornices and water damage, made notes about salvageable architectural elements. The main floors were much as you'd expect: dusty classrooms with ancient chalkboards, offices with rotting wooden desks, and storage rooms filled with forgotten equipment. It wasn't until the fourth day that I found the inconsistency in the building plans. According to the blueprints, the basement level should have been roughly the same dimensions as the ground floor, but my measurements showed a discrepancy of nearly 30 feet along the eastern wall. There was a hidden space down there. I spent hours examining that basement wall, running my hands over the rough stone, looking for any indication of a doorway. Just as I was about to give up, my fingers caught on something, a small, almost imperceptible depression in the mortar between two stones. When I pressed it, I heard a faint mechanical click from somewhere inside the wall. "Well, I'll be damned," I whispered, stepping back as a thin line appeared in what had seemed like solid masonry. Dust cascaded down as the hidden door shifted slightly, just enough for me to see it was there. It took all my strength to pull it open. The hinges groaned in protest, the sound echoing through the empty basement like the moan of something in pain. Beyond was darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight. The air that rushed out was cold, much colder than it should have been, and carried a scent I couldn't immediately identify. Something old and chemical, like formaldehyde mixed with the musty smell of ancient paper. I should have called Dr. Keene right then. I should have reported my find and waited for proper authorization. But curiosity has always been my downfall. I stepped through that doorway alone, my flashlight carving a meager path through the darkness. A narrow staircase descended at a steep angle, much deeper than a normal basement level should go. The walls were different down here too. Not the university's usual brick and mortar, but fitted stone blocks inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. As I descended, I counted the steps: 20, 30, 50. The temperature continued to drop until I could see my breath clouding in front of me. Finally, after 97 steps, I reached the bottom. Part 2. The Forbidden Archive. What I found defied explanation. A vast circular chamber stretched out before me, at least 3 times larger than the building's footprint above. The architecture was all wrong, Gothic arches and buttresses that predated the university by centuries, illuminated by a strange phosphorescent light that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. And books. Thousands upon thousands of books, manuscripts and scrolls filled shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling in concentric rings around a central dais. This was no ordinary university storage facility. This was a library, one that by all rights shouldn't exist. I approached the nearest shelf and examined the tomes. The books were bound in materials I couldn't identify. Some felt like leather, but with all wrong textures. Others seemed almost metallic or crystalline. The languages were even stranger. I recognized Latin and Greek on some spines, but others were written in scripts I'd never seen before. Angular symbols that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from the corner of my eye. When I pulled one volume from the shelf, a relatively normal-looking book bound in faded red cloth, the cover was cold to the touch. Its title was in English. Thresholds Between Perceived Realities, a Compendium. As I opened it, something fell from between the pages. A photograph yellowed with age. It showed a group of men in late 19th century attire, standing around what appeared to be an excavation site. They were gathered around a stone doorway embedded in the earth, identical to the one I'd just passed through. I turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, Expedition to N, 1879, the gateway found. I returned to the book itself and began to read. What I found inside was disturbing. It described our universe as merely one layer of reality, a thin membrane stretched over something it called the abyssal truth. According to the text, what we perceive as fundamental laws of physics are merely local phenomena, like weather patterns on the surface of a much deeper ocean. The book referred to entities existing in these deeper layers of reality, being so fundamentally different from us that merely perceiving them directly would destroy a human mind. Not because they were malevolent, necessarily, but because they operated on principles so alien to our understanding that they broke the framework of human consciousness. I should have put the book back then. I should have left. But something compelled me to continue exploring this impossible library. At the center of the chamber stood the dais I'd noticed earlier. Upon it rested a pedestal of black stone, and on that pedestal lay a single massive book bound in what looked like obsidian plates. Unlike the other books, this one seemed to draw in the phosphorescent light around it, creating a subtle darkness that was somehow visible. As I approached, I felt a pressure building in my ears, as if I were descending deep underwater. The air became thick, resistant. Each step required more effort than the last. Yet still I moved forward, drawn by an irresistible curiosity. The book had no title on its cover, only a symbol, a spiral that seemed to continue inward forever, creating an optical illusion of infinite depth. When I reached out to touch it, my fingers trembled. The moment my skin made contact with that cold, black surface, I heard a sound, not with my ears but somehow directly in my mind. A vast, resonant tone, like a bell the size of a mountain being struck somewhere unimaginably distant. And then the visions began. Part 3. The First Vision. I saw our universe from outside, a fragile bubble floating in a dark sea with countless others. Some bubbles burst and dissolved, others grew and split. From this perspective, I could see how thin the barrier was between our reality and whatever lay beyond. Then my perspective shifted and I was looking at Earth from orbit. Except it wasn't exactly Earth. The continents were wrong, similar but distorted, as if reflected in a warped mirror. And spreading across the surface like a web of luminous filaments was something that looked like a vast nervous system, pulsing with energy. The vision pulled me closer, and I saw that these filaments connected to human beings, millions of them, but they weren't exactly human. Their movements were too coordinated, too precise. They moved like components of a single vast organism. A voice spoke to me then, not in words, but in concepts that unfurled in my mind. This is one possibility, it seemed to say. One branch that grows from the seed of your kind. There are countless others. The scene shifted again. Now I stood in a city I almost recognized. The architecture was familiar yet wrong. Buildings that twisted in ways that should have been structurally impossible. Streets that folded back on themselves in non-Euclidean patterns. And the people, they walked with their eyes fixed forward, expressions blank. Each wore an identical small device behind their ear, pulsing with a soft blue light. As I watched, one man stopped walking suddenly. His device flashed red and he began to convulse. No one around him reacted. Within seconds, his body dissolved into a fine ash that was quickly carried away by the wind. Another possibility. The voice that wasn't a voice conveyed. The cage of perfect efficiency. Before I could process what I was seeing, I was torn away again. Now I floated above a landscape of absolute devastation. The sky was dark with ash, the ground cracked and barren. In the distance, massive structures rose, not buildings, but something like enormous black obelisks that seemed to drink in what little light remained. Between these monoliths moved shapes I couldn't quite comprehend, vast and flowing like living oil, leaving trails of darkness behind them. Wherever they passed, reality itself seemed to warp and tear. And this, came the impression, is what awaits if the barriers fall completely. I tried to pull my hand away from the book then, but I couldn't move. The visions continued to pour into my mind, each more terrible than the last. I saw humanity transformed, enslaved, elevated, and destroyed in 1,000 different ways. I saw the thin protection of our universe's laws peeled back like skin from fruit, exposing us to forces we were never meant to comprehend. And through it all, I sensed something watching. Not just me, but all of humanity. Something ancient and patient, waiting just beyond the threshold of our perception. When I finally managed to break contact with the book, I collapsed onto the stone floor, gasping for breath. My nose was bleeding, my head pounding with the worst migraine I'd ever experienced. I looked at my watch and was shocked to discover that 6 hours had passed, though the visions had seemed to last only minutes. As I lay there, trying to gather my strength, I became aware of something else in the chamber with me, a presence, moving between the shelves of the impossible library. I couldn't see it directly, but I could sense its movement by the way the phosphorescent light dimmed as it passed. I needed to leave. Now. If you're enjoying this journey into cosmic horror, make sure to like this video and consider subscribing for more terrifying tales from beyond the veil of normal perception. Part 4. The Research. I fled from the underground library, taking only the red book and the photograph with me. The hidden door closed behind me with an ominous finality, and I couldn't find the mechanism to open it again, which was fine by me. I had no desire to return to that place. For the next week, I called in sick to work. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, fragments of the visions returned, those twisted versions of humanity, the watching presence, the fragility of our reality. I became obsessed with understanding what I'd experienced. The book I'd taken, Thresholds Between Perceived Realities, became my guide. Though much of it was written in dense academic language, I began to piece together a narrative about the library's origins. According to the text, in 1879, a group of professors from what would later become Blackwood University discovered a system of ancient chambers beneath a prehistoric burial mound during an archaeological expedition in northern Europe. Inside, they found evidence of a civilization that predated any known human culture, one that apparently possessed knowledge that defied conventional understanding of physics and cosmology. The expedition brought back artifacts and texts, which they secretly installed beneath the university's west wing, then under construction. They formed a society dedicated to studying these materials, calling themselves the custodians of the threshold. But as they translated more of the ancient texts, Members of the group began to change. Some disappeared. Others suffered mental breakdowns. By 1897, half the original expedition members had committed suicide, leaving behind journals describing visions of the abyssal truth and entities that wait between the folds of perception. The society continued in secret for decades, recruiting new members from the university faculty. Then, in 1967, something happened. The book was vague on details, referring only to the breach incident that resulted in the collapse of part of the West Wing and the permanent sealing of the underground chambers. I needed to know more. Using the photograph as a reference, I researched the expedition members. Most were relatively easy to identify through university archives, distinguished professors in fields ranging from archaeology to theoretical physics. But one face in the photograph kept drawing my attention. A man standing slightly apart from the others, his expression not triumphant like his colleagues, but wary, almost fearful. After days of research, I identified him as Dr. Edward Marlowe, a professor of comparative mythology who specialized in eschatological beliefs, stories about the end of the world. Unlike his colleagues, there was very little information about him in the university records after 1885. It was as if he had simply vanished. I expanded my search to public records, newspaper archives, anything I could find. Finally, in a digitized collection of asylum records, I found him. Dr. Edward Marlowe had been committed to Greywood Psychiatric Hospital in 1886, diagnosed with acute paranoid delusions and severe graphomania. According to the records, he filled thousands of pages with incomprehensible writings and disturbing illustrations before his death in 1889. The records noted that his final coherent statement was, "They're allowing themselves to be used as doors. May God forgive them. They don't understand what they're letting through." I needed to see those writings. If Marlowe had been trying to warn about something related to the library and its contents, his records might help me understand what I was dealing with. Greywood had been closed in the 1970s, but its records had been transferred to the State Historical Society. I submitted a research request, claiming I was working on a book about early psychiatric treatments. 3 days later, I received access to digitized copies of Marlowe's file. What I found chilled me to the bone. Page after page of dense text, interspersed with drawings that made my eyes hurt to look at them. Not because they were gruesome, but because they seemed to depict geometries that shouldn't be possible, perspectives that the human mind wasn't equipped to process. But among the apparent madness were passages of crystal clarity. Marlowe had been trying to document what he'd learned about the nature of reality from the ancient texts and about the entities that existed beyond our perception. "They are not gods," he wrote. "Gods would imply beings with motivations we could comprehend, even if their power vastly exceeds our own. These are something else entirely. Consciousness without form, existence without limitation. They perceive all possible realities simultaneously, feeding on the potential energy of choices not made." In another entry, "Our universe exists as a byproduct of their movements, like ripples formed by stones dropped in a pond. They are not malevolent toward humanity any more than we are malevolent toward bacteria. They simply do not register our existence as meaningful. But when they notice us, when they turn their attention to our fragile bubble of reality, the membrane thins." The most disturbing passage came near the end of his writings. "The library is not simply a collection of knowledge. It is a tuning fork, resonating with frequencies from beyond. Each text is a thin point in the barrier, a potential gateway, and the custodians are using them, thinking they can control the flow of information, the exposure to that which lies beyond. Fools. With each translation, with each study session, they create new connections, new conduits. They do not understand that knowledge of this kind is not inert. It is alive, seeking minds to infect and transform." The final pages of Marlowe's writings became increasingly fractured. diagrams of complex mathematical equations interspersed with what looked like attempts to create some kind of protective barrier or ward. His handwriting became more erratic, and his language shifted between English and other scripts I couldn't identify. His final entry, dated 3 days before his death, contained just one sentence. I can feel them watching me through my own eyes. Part 5. The Signs. Armed with this new understanding, I returned to the university with a growing sense of dread. My contract required me to deliver a full assessment of the West Wing, which meant I needed to return at least once more. But now I had questions, specific questions for Dr. Keene. I found her in her office, surrounded by stacks of papers. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there before. When I entered, she seemed startled, almost afraid, before composing herself. "How is the survey coming along?" she asked, not quite meeting my gaze. Instead of answering, I placed the photograph on her desk. Her reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath, pupils dilating in shock. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. "You know exactly where I found it," I replied. "The question is, what do you know about what's down there?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she got up and closed her office door, locking it. "I'm not one of them, if that's what you're wondering," she said finally. "But yes, I know about the library. My grandfather was one of the custodians in the 1960s. He was there during the breach." She walked to a painting on her wall, a strange abstract piece that I now realized depicted something like the spiral symbol from the Black Book. She removed it, revealing a small safe, which she quickly opened. From inside, she withdrew a journal bound in faded brown leather. "This was his," she said, placing it on the desk between us. "He gave it to me before he died, made me promise to keep it hidden. I didn't understand most of it until I became facilities director and found the sealed records about the West Wing." I opened the journal. Inside were observations similar to Marlowe's, though more technical. Her grandfather, Dr. Thomas Keene, had been a physicist specializing in quantum mechanics. His entries documented experiments conducted in the underground library, attempts to measure what he called reality fluctuations around certain texts. "They've been trying to reopen the library for decades," Dr. Keene said quietly. "Previous administrations blocked it, but the current board, they don't understand what they're dealing with. They think there might be valuable historical artifacts down there that could bring prestige to the university." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But that's not why they hired you. They hired you because they couldn't get anyone else to survey the West Wing. The last 3 contractors quit within days, claiming they heard voices coming from behind the walls. One had to be hospitalized after attempting to break through the basement wall with his bare hands." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why didn't you warn me?" "I tried," she said, gesturing helplessly. "I told you no one had been down there in decades. I hoped the entrance was permanently sealed. My grandfather wrote that they used some kind of special mortar infused with substances that were supposed to block whatever energies emanate from that place." She looked at me with genuine concern. "How did you get in?" I explained about finding the hidden mechanism. As I spoke, her face grew paler. "And you touched one of the books? The black one on the pedestal?" When I nodded, she closed her eyes briefly, as if in pain. "Then it's already started," she said. "The connection. Once established, it's difficult to break." "What connection?" I demanded, an edge of panic in my voice. "Between your consciousness and theirs. The entities beyond the threshold. My grandfather called them the observers. In his journal, he theorized that they cannot fully enter our reality, but they can influence it through minds they've connected with." I told her about the visions, the sense of being watched, the presence I'd felt in the library. With each detail, her expression grew more grave. "The breach in 1967 happened because one of the custodians became fully influenced," she explained. He tried to perform some kind of ritual described in one of the texts, something that was supposed to thin the veil permanently. 3 people died stopping him. The university administration at the time decided to seal everything away and bury the truth. She opened her grandfather's journal to a marked page and pushed it toward me. But according to my grandfather's final entries, sealing the physical space wasn't enough. Once the connection is established, the observers can reach through in other ways. The page she showed me contained a list of symptoms, titled Signs of Influence. 1. Persistent dreams of impossible architecture. 2. Sensitivity to certain geometric patterns. 3. Perception of shadows moving independently of light sources. 4. Sensation of being watched, especially in empty rooms. 5. Brief auditory hallucinations, voices speaking in unknown languages. 6. Temporary spatial disorientation, familiar places seeming unfamiliar. 7. Intrusive thoughts and unfamiliar patterns of thinking. With growing horror, I realized I'd experienced 5 of the 7 symptoms in the past week. We'll continue our descent into cosmic horror after this brief interruption. If the entities beyond are calling to you through this story, show your allegiance by hitting that like button and subscribing to the Obscuralore Vault. We have many more secrets to share with those brave enough to listen. Part 6. The Spreading Influence. What happens next? I asked, my mouth dry with fear. If the influence continues? Dr. Keene hesitated. According to my grandfather, it varies. Some people become like prophets, obsessively trying to communicate what they've glimpsed beyond the threshold. Others try to find ways to strengthen the connection, to bring more of that knowledge through. And some try to break the barriers completely. She retrieved another book from her safe, this one newer, with a plain black cover. After I found my grandfather's journal, I started researching similar phenomena. There are accounts throughout history of people encountering knowledge that changes them, texts or artifacts that seem to serve as conduits to something beyond normal perception. The book was a collection of case studies, incidents from around the world and throughout history that matched the pattern we were discussing. A monastery in Tibet, where monks who studied certain ancient scrolls began experiencing shared visions and eventually walked into a frozen lake, claiming they could see a city beneath the ice. A team of quantum physicists in the 1970s who, after developing a particular mathematical model, all independently committed suicide, leaving identical notes. The equation is a door and I've seen what's on the other side. Most disturbing was the case from only 15 years ago. A private research group investigating deep-sea trenches who recovered unusual artifacts from the ocean floor. Within months, all 12 researchers had either disappeared or were institutionalized. The only cohesive statement from any of them came from the lead scientist, who told her psychiatrist, "We think we're at the top of the food chain, but we're just plankton floating above an abyss we can't comprehend. And now something down there knows we exist." "Is there any way to break the connection?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. Dr. Keene nodded slowly. My grandfather believed so. He developed a method after the breach, a combination of mental exercises and certain compounds that he claimed could reset neural pathways affected by exposure to threshold knowledge. She hesitated, then added, "But it wasn't without risks. One of his colleagues who underwent the treatment lost all memory of the preceding 5 years. Another developed severe aphasia, lost the ability to understand written language completely." I was about to ask more when a sharp pain lanced through my head. For a moment, my vision blurred, and I saw the room from multiple angles simultaneously, as if viewing it from several different positions at once. When my perception normalized, Dr. Keene was staring at me with undisguised alarm. "It's happening faster than I expected," she said quietly. "The influence is growing stronger." That night, I dreamed of the library again. But this time I wasn't alone. Shadowy figures moved between the shelves, some in period clothing from different eras, others in modern dress. All had the same blank expression, the same methodical movements as they pulled books from shelves, opened them, and became frozen in the moment of reading. In the dream, I approached one, a man in what looked like 1960s attire. As I drew closer, I saw his eyes were completely black, reflecting the spiral symbol from the obsidian book. "We are the custodians," he said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "We maintain the connection. We prepare the way." I tried to back away, but found myself surrounded by the shadowy readers. They weren't threatening me, but their presence was suffocating, as if they were drawing all the oxygen from the room. "Who are you preparing the way for?" I asked. The man smiled, but the expression was wrong somehow, too wide, too fixed. "Not who. What? The next paradigm. The merging of perspectives. Soon you will understand. Soon you will help us." I woke gasping for breath, my sheets soaked with sweat. The dream had felt more real than reality itself. As I sat up, trying to calm my racing heart, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. On my bedroom wall, in my own handwriting but in a script I didn't recognize, were dozens of complex equations and diagrams, similar to those in Marlowe's final pages. I had no memory of writing them. Part 7. The Decision. The next morning I called Dr. Keene in a panic. When I described what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Come to my house," she finally said. "Not my office. We can't talk about this at the university." She gave me an address across town. "And whatever you do, don't go back to the West Wing." Her home was a modest Victorian, surrounded by a garden of strange, pale plants I didn't recognize. Inside, the walls were lined with bookshelves, but unlike the cosmic horror I'd been experiencing, these contained benign texts on physics, botany, and traditional medicine. She led me to a study at the back of the house. The room was circular, with symbols painted on the floor that reminded me uncomfortably of the ones I'd seen in the underground library, though these were somehow different, opposing forces rather than conduits. "My grandfather's workroom," she explained. "He spent the last 20 years of his life developing countermeasures against the influence." From a cabinet, she removed a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl in geometric patterns. Inside was a vial of cloudy liquid and a notebook with detailed instructions. "This is his treatment protocol," she said, handling the vial like it contained nitroglycerin, a combination of compounds derived from certain fungi and plants that affect neural pathways, along with a meditative technique designed to restructure thought patterns. I looked at the vial skeptically. "You want me to take some unknown drug created by a man who was dealing with the same influence I'm experiencing?" "I understand your hesitation," she said, but my grandfather remained clear-headed enough to document everything meticulously. The compounds themselves aren't exotic, derivatives of existing substances studied for their effects on neuroplasticity. The innovation was in the precise formulation and the accompanying mental exercises. She opened the notebook, showing me pages of chemical formulas, brain scan images, and detailed reports on test subjects, all seeming legitimately scientific, if unconventional. "He tested it on himself first," she added, "after developing symptoms of influence following the breach. It worked for him, and for 2 others who had been exposed. But as I mentioned, there were side effects for some." I was torn. The rational part of my mind, the part still grounded in the conventional reality I'd known all my life, was screaming that this was madness. Taking some unknown substance based on the theories of a possibly compromised researcher was the height of foolishness. But another part of me, the part that had touched the black book and seen beyond our fragile reality, knew that conventional solutions wouldn't work for an unconventional problem, and the influence was growing stronger. That morning, I'd found myself unconsciously drawing the spiral symbol over and over in my notebook. Twice during the drive to Dr. Keene's house, I'd experienced moments of spatial distortion, the road ahead seeming to fold in impossible ways before snapping back to normal. "What happens if I do nothing?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "The connection will strengthen," she said simply. Eventually, you'll become a conduit, like the custodians, like the researchers in these case studies. Your perception will be altered permanently. You'll see reality as they do, as a thin membrane over something vast and incomprehensible, and you'll be compelled to share that perspective, to spread the influence. She hesitated, then added, and in some cases, in the most severe cases, the person becomes a kind of doorway, a physical manifestation of the threshold. Like what happened in 1967, I said quietly. She nodded. My grandfather never fully explained what occurred during the breach. His notes just say they had to close a colleague who had become an opening. I don't know exactly what that means, and I don't want to know. I stared at the vial of cloudy liquid. And if I take this, if it works? The connection will be severed. You'll still remember what you saw, what you experienced, but it will no longer have a hold over you. It will be just a memory, not an active conduit. In that moment, as if to emphasize the urgency of my decision, I experienced another perceptual shift. Dr. Keen's face seemed to age and youth rapidly, cycling through decades in seconds. Behind her, shadows moved against the wall in patterns that corresponded to no physical objects in the room. And I heard a voice, the same voice that wasn't a voice from my contact with the Black Book. Why resist understanding? Why cling to limitation? The episode lasted only seconds, but it left me shaking. Without further hesitation, I reached for the vial. I'll do it. Dr. Keen looked relieved. We'll need to prepare. The protocol requires specific conditions, a controlled environment, proper monitoring. She explained that the treatment would take place in the circular room, which had been designed by her grandfather for this specific purpose. The geometric patterns on the floor weren't just decorative. They were based on principles he'd discovered that seemed to inhibit the kind of reality distortions associated with the influence. We spent the next hour reviewing the protocol. I would take the compound, then follow a guided meditation focusing on specific mental imagery designed to restructure neural pathways affected by threshold exposure. Throughout, Dr. Keen would monitor my vital signs and be ready to intervene if anything went wrong. As evening approached, we made final preparations. Dr. Keen lit candles at specific points around the circle. Not for atmosphere, she explained, but because her grandfather's research suggested that certain wavelengths of light facilitated the treatment's effectiveness. Outside, a storm was brewing. A real one, not just in my increasingly unstable perception. Thunder rumbled as rain began to lash against the windows. It felt appropriate somehow. I sat in the center of the circular room, cross-legged on a cushion placed at the nexus of the geometric patterns. Dr. Keen handed me the vial, now uncapped. Once you take it, there's no turning back, she warned. The next 6 hours will be challenging. You'll experience intense hallucinations, possibly physical discomfort. The barriers between your conscious and unconscious mind will temporarily dissolve. I nodded, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. The storm outside intensified, as if nature itself was responding to what we were about to attempt. Whatever you see, whatever you experience, she continued, remember that it isn't real, at least, not in this reality. The entities may try to convince you to stop the treatment. They may offer knowledge, power, or threaten terrible consequences. Ignore all of it. I raised the vial to my lips. The liquid had a strange, metallic scent. For a brief moment, I hesitated. Was I really going to drink some unknown compound created by a man who might have been influenced by the same entities I was trying to escape? But then I felt it again. That sense of being watched from inside my own mind. In the shadows of the room, I thought I saw the spiral symbol forming and dissolving. I drank the contents in one swift motion. The taste was indescribable, not unpleasant but utterly alien, like nothing I'd ever experienced before. It left a tingling sensation as it went down, spreading warmth through my chest. Now close your eyes, Dr. Keen instructed, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. Visualize a sphere of white light surrounding you, protecting you. Inside this sphere, No external influence can reach you. I did as instructed, focusing on creating this mental barrier. For several minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, I became aware of a pressure, as if something was pushing against the imaginary sphere, testing its strength. "You feel them now," Dr. Keene said. It wasn't a question. "That's good. It means the compound is working. The connection is becoming tangible, which means it can be severed." The pressure increased. Behind my closed eyelids, I began to see the spiral symbol pulsing, trying to imprint itself on my consciousness. I struggled to maintain the visualization of the protective sphere. "They're resistant," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "They don't want to let go." "Of course not," she replied calmly. "You're a conduit, a doorway they've been cultivating. But remember, this is your mind, your reality. You have the final authority here." Suddenly, the room around me seemed to dissolve. I was back in the underground library, but changed, expanded to impossible dimensions. The shelves now reached into infinity, and between them moved shapes I couldn't comprehend. Beings of pure geometry, entities composed of angles that shouldn't exist. At the center, where the dais had been, now stood a massive doorway, a perfect arch of obsidian stone, within which swirled darkness deeper than the space between stars. Standing before it were figures in robes, their faces obscured by hoods. They were chanting in a language that hurt my ears, each syllable causing ripples in the very fabric of reality around them. With a shock of recognition, I realized that one of the robed figures was me, or rather what I would become if the influence continued unchecked. This other self turned slowly, fixing me with eyes that were now just swirling vortices of darkness. "Why resist?" my other self asked, its voice resonating with undertones that weren't human. "This is evolution. This is ascension. We stand at the threshold of understanding that will transform humanity." "It's not real," I told myself, clinging to Dr. Keene's instructions. "It's the influence trying to maintain its hold." The scene shifted again. Now I stood in what appeared to be a massive lecture hall. Hundreds of people sat in rapt attention as a figure at the podium spoke. Again, it was me, but changed, refined, radiating a charismatic energy that drew all eyes. "The knowledge I'm sharing today will revolutionize our understanding of reality," my doppelganger was saying. "The old paradigms of physics, of consciousness, even of existence itself, all will be transformed by what we've discovered." On the screen behind this, other me were equations and diagrams, the same ones I'd unconsciously written on my wall. The audience was transcribing them furiously, their expressions hungry, almost desperate. I understood the temptation being presented. Not destruction or madness, but influence. The power to shape human understanding, to be the prophet of a new way of seeing reality. "Return to your protective sphere," I heard Dr. Keene's voice, distant but clear. "Focus on severing the connection, not on what they're showing you." With tremendous effort, I reasserted the visualization of the white light surrounding me. The lecture hall wavered, then dissolved. But the visions didn't stop. They became more personal, more targeted. I saw my parents, who had died years ago in a car accident. They stood before me, exactly as I remembered them. "We've missed you," my mother said, her voice bringing tears to my eyes. "Where we are now, it's beautiful. We can show you. We can be together again." My father nodded. "The knowledge in that library, it's not just about cosmic horror. It's about transcendence, about breaking the barriers between life and death, between separated consciousnesses." I felt myself wavering. Even knowing this was manipulation, the sight of them so real, so present. "Remember who you are," Dr. Keene's voice cut through. "Remember what is real." "You're not them," I said aloud, my voice breaking. "You're using my memories, my emotions to maintain your hold." The images of my parents flickered, their expressions shifting momentarily to something alien before reasserting their familiar features. "We are what you would call the observers," they said in unison, their voices now overlapping in an impossible harmony. "But that name is insufficient. We are the potential from which your reality condensed. We are what existed before existence had meaning." They stepped closer, their movements too fluid, too perfect. "We don't wish to destroy humanity," they continued. "We wish to elevate it, to bring it into alignment with the deeper currents of reality. Those who resist call it madness or horror because they cannot comprehend the beauty of true perception." I felt myself being pulled in two directions, part of me wanting to believe, to embrace this offered transcendence. Another part, clinging desperately to the reality I knew, to the protection of Dr. Keen's ritual. In that moment of division, I glimpsed something true, a fragment of genuine understanding about what I was facing. These entities, these observers, they weren't lying exactly. They were offering a kind of evolution, a transformation of consciousness. But it was an evolution that would utterly destroy what made us human. Our limited perception wasn't just a handicap, it was a protection. It was what allowed us to exist as discrete, individual consciousnesses. "I choose humanity," I said firmly. "I choose limitation. I choose the reality that exists within the boundaries of human perception." As I made this declaration, I felt something shift inside me, a tearing sensation, as if a connection was being severed. The visions before me began to fragment, breaking apart like a shattered mirror. The entities made one final attempt to maintain their hold. The scene around me transformed into a vision of apocalyptic horror, the sky torn open, revealing a vastness filled with writhing geometries and impossible colors. Humanity below, their minds broken by the sight, some transforming into things no longer recognizably human. "This is the inevitable future," the voice insisted. "With or without you, the threshold will thin. Reality will align with the deeper truth. We offer you understanding now, preparation, the chance to guide humanity through the transition. Refuse, and you condemn your species to face this unprepared." I closed my eyes against the vision, focusing all my will on the protective sphere, on severing the connection completely. "No," I said simply. "This is not inevitable. It's just another manipulation." With those words, I felt something inside my mind snap, like a taut cord finally breaking. There was a moment of absolute silence, of perfect stillness. Then consciousness slipped away entirely. Part 8. The Aftermath. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment I was disoriented, unable to remember where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then it all came flooding back. The library, the visions, Dr. Keen's treatment. I was lying on a couch in what appeared to be Dr. Keen's living room. A blanket had been draped over me and a cup of tea sat cooling on the coffee table beside me. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind that peculiar freshness in the air that follows heavy rain. Dr. Keen entered from the kitchen, carrying a tray with toast and fruit. When she saw I was awake, she smiled, a genuine expression of relief. "Welcome back," she said. "How do you feel?" I took a moment to assess myself. The persistent headache that had plagued me since my encounter with the Black Book was gone. The strange double vision, the sense of reality folding in on itself, also gone. Most importantly, the feeling of being watched from within my own mind had vanished. "Better," I said, surprised by how true it was. "Clearer, like I've woken from a fever dream." She nodded, setting the tray down. "The treatment appears to have been successful. You've been unconscious for about 14 hours, longer than my grandfather's notes suggested, but within the range of possibilities." I sat up slowly, testing my equilibrium. "What happened after I passed out?" "You went through several phases," she explained. "First convulsions, not violent, but your body was definitely responding to something. Then a period of rapid eye movement, like intense dreaming. Finally, About 6 hours in, you simply relaxed completely. Your vital signs stabilized and you appeared to be in normal sleep. She poured me a fresh cup of tea from a pot on the tray. Do you remember the visions? I nodded. The memories were still there, but they felt different now, like remembering a film I'd watched rather than experiences I'd lived through. The emotional impact, the sense of overwhelming cosmic significance, had faded. They tried everything to maintain the connection, I told her. Promises of knowledge, reunions with lost loved ones, warnings of inevitable catastrophe. And yet, in the end, breaking free was surprisingly simple. That's often how it is with powerful deceptions, she said. Their strength lies in making you believe breaking free is impossible. Once you truly decide to sever the connection, once you stop believing in its inevitability, the spell is broken. I sipped the tea, letting its warmth spread through me. So what now? Do I just go back to my life as if none of this happened? Dr. Keen's expression grew serious. You can try. Many do. But knowing what you know now, about the library, about the entities beyond the threshold, that knowledge doesn't simply disappear. The difference is that now it's just knowledge, not an active influence. She hesitated, then added, My grandfather spent the rest of his life studying ways to permanently seal the thresholds. Not just the physical library, but all such points of connection. That became his purpose. Others who've gone through similar experiences often find themselves drawn to related pursuits. I understood what she was suggesting. The experience had changed me, connection or no connection. I couldn't unlearn what I now knew about the true nature of reality, about the fragility of our existence. The survey of the West Wing, I said suddenly, remembering my original purpose. I still need to complete it. Dr. Keen shook her head firmly. I've already handled that. As of yesterday, the university board has approved an indefinite hold on any restoration work on the West Wing. The official reason is structural instability, but she gave me a meaningful look. You convinced them to leave it sealed, I said, impressed. Let's just say I made sure certain historical documents about the 1967 incident found their way to key board members. Sometimes the best way to contain something is to wrap it in bureaucracy and liability concerns. She rose and went to a bookshelf, returning with a thick folder. But that's not a permanent solution. Sooner or later, someone else will become curious. Someone else will find their way in. She handed me the folder. Inside were copies of her grandfather's research, Marlowe's writings from the asylum, and her own compiled case studies of similar phenomena around the world. I've been looking for someone to share this burden with, she said quietly. Someone who understands what we're dealing with but isn't under its influence. If you're willing. I looked through the documents, a strange sense of purpose beginning to form within me. For days, I'd been fighting against the knowledge I'd gained, seeing it only as an infection to be cured. But perhaps there was another perspective. Perhaps this knowledge, terrible as it was, could be used to protect others, to strengthen the barriers between our reality and what lay beyond. The custodians got it wrong, I said slowly. They thought they could control the connection, use it to elevate humanity. But some knowledge isn't meant to be integrated, it's meant to be contained. Dr. Keen nodded. Exactly. Not censored or destroyed. That's impossible and potentially dangerous in itself, but contained, understood within proper contexts and protections. I thought of all the other sites like the underground library that might exist around the world, ancient texts and artifacts serving as unwitting conduits to entities beyond comprehension. How many others might be experiencing what I had, without someone like Dr. Keen to help them break free? I'll help, I said finally. I want to understand how to close these thresholds permanently. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. It's not a burden anyone should bear alone. In the days that followed, I officially resigned from my preservation work. I told colleagues I was pursuing personal research, not entirely untrue. Dr. Keene and I established a small foundation, ostensibly dedicated to preserving historical texts and artifacts at risk of deterioration. In reality, our mission was to identify and secure threshold points around the world. Our first task was creating a more stable version of her grandfather's treatment, one that could help others who had been exposed to threshold knowledge without the severe side effects. We contacted specialists in neuroscience and pharmacology, framing our research in terms they could accept within conventional paradigms. A month after my experience in the library, while digitizing some of Dr. Keene's case files, I came across a report that chilled me. It detailed a small archaeological expedition currently underway in northern Egypt, excavating a previously undiscovered chamber beneath an ancient temple. The researchers had reported finding texts written in an unknown script that appears to predate hieroglyphics. More concerning was a line from one researcher's blog quoted in the report. The symbols seem to shift when not viewed directly, and several team members have reported unusual dreams since we began translating the first segments. I called Dr. Keene immediately. Within days, we were on a plane to Egypt, carrying with us treatments and protective measures developed from her grandfather's work. Whether we would arrive in time to prevent another threshold from opening, I didn't know. But for the first time since my encounter with the Black Book, I felt purposeful rather than afraid. I still dream of the library sometimes. I still remember the visions the entities showed me. Those possible futures where humanity is transformed, elevated, or destroyed by knowledge it wasn't ready to comprehend. But those dreams no longer feel like invasions from outside. They're just memories, just knowledge I carry. And knowledge, I've come to understand, is neither good nor evil in itself. It's how we approach it, how we contain it or release it, that determines whether it becomes a doorway to destruction or a tool for preservation. The truth is, some books are meant to stay closed. Some knowledge is best left as theory rather than experience, not because we fear advancement, but because true wisdom includes understanding our own limitations, the boundaries that define us as human. As for the underground library at Blackwood University, it remains sealed for now. Dr. Keene has installed additional security measures, and we monitor the site regularly for any signs of activity, but we know it's only a matter of time before someone else feels its call, before curiosity once again challenges the barriers we've erected. When that happens, we'll be ready. Because while cosmic horror may be inevitable in a universe vaster and stranger than we can comprehend, surrender to it is not. The human mind may be fragile, but it possesses one power the entities beyond the threshold cannot understand: the ability to choose limitation, to embrace the bounded reality that allows us to remain ourselves. Remember that, if you ever find yourself standing before a threshold of your own. Some doors are meant to remain closed, not out of fear, but out of the wisdom that comes from knowing exactly who and what you are. Conclusion: this has been the Obscuralore Vault. If you've made it this far, you've glimpsed just one of the countless mysteries lurking at the edges of human perception. But beware, knowledge once gained is not easily forgotten. If you found yourself drawn to this tale of cosmic horror, make sure to subscribe to the Obscuralore Vault for more journeys into the unknown. Like this video if the entities beyond the threshold compel you, and share it with those brave enough to face the truth. Remember, reality is thin, curiosity is dangerous, and some knowledge comes with a terrible price. Until next time, keep the doors closed but your mind open. Thank you for listening to the Obscuralore Vault.